बुद्धियुक्तो जहातीह उभे सुकृत दुष्कृते तस्माद् योगाय युज्यस्व योगः कर्मसु कौशलम्. So in the 47th verse, we had one shloka where he says, Siddhya Siddhyor Samo Bhutva Samatvam Yoga Uchyate. So the first definition we got as what is yoga there was Samatvam. The equanimity of mind is termed as yoga. In this verse, he is giving another definition or another meaning to the yoga, which he says Yoga Karmasu Kaushalam. So buddhi is again wisdom. So when a person performs the actions in the wisdom, evenness of wisdom, he doesn't see good and bad. He casts away both good and bad, or does his action not looking for good or bad, just for the sake of action. Again, it is a desire less action at the time of performing the action. Such a person will perform an action very skillfully. He will be able to perform his best. He can show dexterity in his action, and such action is nothing but yoga. So that is the second definition we get here when we see in this verse, yoga karmasu kaushalam. We have seen that desire is nothing but anticipation of reward when we perform the action, not for the sake of action. We have to have a desire in case we have to perform any action. That is fine. But here what desire is we are talking about is when you are performing any action, at that time, you should not have any anticipation for your results. So that is the desire that is being talked about here. And what will happen when you perform actions with desire? It will be fruitative, but still it creates bondage for the results of action. Meaning your happiness or your sadness will depend upon your mental state, in a nutshell, will depend upon the result of the action. You cannot be having the equanimity of mind when you perform actions with desire. And what will happen when you perform action without desire? It will be fruitative, but it does not create any kind of bondage. The first one, when you do it with desire, it creates bondage, and also it creates more and more desires. In the sense, whenever you perform an action, we can see that in the course of performing an action, if you are not able to complete that action, something happens in the middle. We get angry when we are not able to perform what we have desired for. And second thing, when your wish gets fulfilled, again, more desires will be created in having like when we say that we acquire something, then we need to preserve it. So your desires, more and more gets desires created in having that particular object, thing, or a person, or a relationship, whatever it is, whatever action you did for a certain thing, once you get it, you will have again some more desires in the sake of, in the interest of protecting it, or in the interest of keeping it for a long time. Whereas when we perform actions without desires, this is not going to happen. So when we talked what is yoga, we understood that yoga is a union. Union at three levels. At physical level, we are trying to unite. We are deviated from our health, which is our natural state, and we are trying to get back to health. At a mental level, we are blissful souls, but we have lost that kind of constant and continuous happiness, and that's why we are trying to come back to our natural state, which is happiness. And in the terms of spirituality, we are that universal divine nature, and we still, because of the ignorance or ego, we consider ourselves as the individual entities. So in the spiritual level, we are trying to unite the individual soul with the supreme soul, or the individuality with the divinity. So when we have to do that, that's only possible when we do actions in the spirit of yoga or the spirituality. When we So the two paths for an action is actions with desire, action without desire. Action without desire is taking the path of spirituality. Action with desire is taking the path of the materialistic world. And when you take this path, what is happen? Two things will happen. When you are having good desires, desires can be both, like your thoughts could be both good and bad. So desires could be both good and bad. And desires produce vasanas. Like we have seen the cycle, where vasana is both cause as well as effect. So when we have more and more desires with our current actions, some of them can be fulfilled and some of them cannot be fulfilled. Again, that unfulfilled desires will go into the bucket of vasanas because they are still not manifested. And that vasanas is the one that creates bondage for us to take birth again and again. So when you are having a lot of good desires, creating more and more good desires, you end up having good vasanas. And if you are producing more and more bad desires, you end up having bad vasanas. At the end, whatever it is, you have a good vasana or bad vasana, you are going to have your birth. You are not breaking the cycle of birth and death because exhaustion of vasanas is breaking off the cycle of birth and death where we unite with the individuality merges with the divinity. Until the time we have vasana, either it could be good or either it could be bad. We will not be able to break the cycle and come out. And that's why here he says that we have to take the actions in the spirit of Buddhi Yoga, Karma Yoga, or call it the path of spirituality, by doing which you will not produce more and more desires. So your actions will be for the exhaustion of whatever desires you have, whatever vasanas you had. And once your vasanas get exhausted, that will be the final stage where you will not have any kind of vasana to act upon for your own personal needs. It could be your ego and egocentric needs. And that's when the individuality totally understands the divinity and merges with it. When we take the two definitions, one definition is to control the mind, which says samatvam yoga uchate, equanimity of mind is yoga. And here it says yoga karmasu kaushalam, acting in the spirit like this, the excellence in action or the dexterity in action is yoga. That's why Bhagavad Gita here focuses on acting skillfully so that you get peace of mind. In this world, when you take a lot of people, they fall between these two categories where people are too much passionate about work, people are too much involved in work, yet cannot strike a balance with the mind's mental state and mental equipoise. So they are the people who are dynamic in nature, but they lack tranquility or peace of mind. Others said there are people who are always peaceful, but they are not conquering this world or coming actively into the world to do all kinds of activities. They are peace seekers who are peace, but not much of action. When we follow these two formulas and try to use our intellect to guide our actions and always be mindful about what kind of action we are performing, are we having egocentric desires? Are we selfish with our actions? And slowly take up the path of karma yoga, which is the action performing in the spirit of service and sacrifice. You will be able to achieve both, meaning you will be successful in each and every activity you do. It doesn't pertain to any field. In each and every activity you do, you will be successful. At the same time, you will also be peaceful. So when we take action, we have the path of materialism, which is desire oriented actions, and taking an action in the path of spirituality, which is karma yoga. And here we have seen that yoga karmasu kaushalam, excellence in one's action is yoga. How does that excellence come? When you perform actions without getting attached to the desires. So buddhi yuktos jahatiha ube sukruta dushkrute. So he says both good and bad we have to raise up. So when we raise up above the good and bads or the results of the actions, you will get excellence in your action. So skill in action is the technique that steers you clear of terrestrial entanglements and ushers you towards the transcendental, which takes you up and up in your spiritual journey. So this is the same thing I explained the two verses. So in many yoga shastras also, when definition of yoga comes, these two are the widely quoted definitions as when they tell about yoga. There are a lot of yoga definitions from Patanjali and all, but from Bhagavad Gita, these two are the most quoted verses or the most quoted statements in terms of the definition of what is yoga. Because you need to be equanimous in your mind and you need to be skillful in your action. When both these are combined, you conquer the world. At the same time, you are always peaceful with your mind. Any questions in this verse? Okay, I'll continue with the next one. Karmajam buddhi yukta hi phalam tyaktva manishinaha janma bandha vinirmuktaha padam gacchantya namayam. So he is continuing the verse. Now he told in the previous verse that we have to not be attached to the desires or do it in the spirit of buddhi yoga, so that you will get dexterity or skillness in your action. And here he is continuing to say a wise person will always do his actions. How does he do his actions? Phalam tyaktva. He renounces the fruits of actions and he does the actions. By doing what will happen? He gets freed from birth and death. Janma bandha vinirmuktaha. So he gets freed from his birth and death. Padam gacchantya namayam. How does he get freed from birth and death? He says, explains here that by transcending the evil. So he is going to transcend the evil to get away from the cycle of birth and death. And what is the evil that he is talking about here? Is nothing but vasanas. We have seen the cycle of birth and death, and when we also studied the karma theory, we understood that the seed, why are we born? The seed of our cause or the causal body for which we take a form in any form is our vasanas. Manifested desires. So when we have and supreme consciousness, once we transcend the vasanas, we will be able to reach the subcausal body, and because of vasanas we have to take birth again and again. That is considered as evil from not reaching the supreme state or for making us one with this universe. And that's why he's saying here, the wise person, whoever knows the truth of what he should do with his actions, he will always renounce the fruits of actions. And what is going to happen by renouncing the fruits of actions? He is going to get liberated from the terms of birth and death by transcending the evil that is in between the individuality and the divinity. Let's not take about the spiritual path, but in the normal terms of materialism also, when you perform any action without getting attached to the results, first thing you can achieve is a hormonal balance in our body. When our mind is restless, when the stress hormones are under control or produced only to the amounts they are needed by our body, the first thing that we achieve is a hormonal balance, harmony of the hormones in our body, which is a very good thing for a good health, because most of the problems that we see today, 70 to 80%, are because of the hormonal disorders, because of the mental conditions that each one of us are going through. So if you're not going to think about the terms of birth and death, rebirth, or all these things also, let's take it in the lower levels. What is going to happen from this verse or from this philosophy that Lord Krishna is stating Arjuna? He is telling us to renounce the fruits of action. Just think it in your own terms. When you are doing action, when you are doing any action, try to see by not being attached to the fruits of action, having openness, put in your best efforts and be prepared to whatever comes in because of the action, results of the action, and see how your mind functions or how your mental states are when you perform the actions adhering to this particular verse. You will see certainly the difference, and you can then decide whether to choose this formula or technique in your actions or not. So what will happen to our unfulfilled desires? Our unfulfilled desires will again turn into vasanas. That's why it is considered as the evil. So when you don't want this evil to be there, you have to perform actions without getting attached to the results of the action. The fountain of content must spring up in the mind. And he who has had so little knowledge of human nature as to seek happiness by changing anything but his own disposition will waste his life in fruitless efforts and multiply the grief he proposes to remove. This is by Dr. Samuel Johnson. So this is also a kind of the things that we had been reading, that happiness lies within us. When we attribute our happiness to the external world, to the external things, for the external possessions and enjoyments, we can never be happy. We can be happy momentarily, but that happiness is also coming from us and not from the objects or the things outside. When you completely realize that, then you will start the journey inwards, because you have convinced and understood that it's not the external objects that are the source of happiness, but the true light, like the sun, where true sun is the true source of energy or the light. But still sometimes we don't see the sun, but we see the reflection of sun somewhere and see that the reflected object or the mirror is the source of light. In the same way, when we don't know the truth, we think that we are deriving happiness from the objects, from the things, from our relationships, or whatever it could be. But what is the truth? We are that happiness and we are meant to be happy all the time. Any questions in that verse?
No, Apita.
Okay. So he's telling about the skill. But why I'm repeating this again and again is that that is the crux of for us to really understand. We might feel that it's very weird. How can we not expect when we are acting? But you try it out and see. Again, to understand, it's not that we are supposed to have any kind of ambitions, goals, or anything. This formula is at the time of acting. So when you are acting, do not get agitated, do not get anxious, do not get worried, do not get any kind of emotions that crop up that will actually hinder your performance. That's the reason this karma phalatyagam, or the renunciation of fruits of actions, has a very great preaching or a very great impact in the performance of karma yoga. Now he continues, Yada te moha kalilam buddhirvyatitarishyati tada gantasi nirvedam shrotavyasya shrutasya cha. Here he continues saying, when your intellect crosses over the impurity of delusion, then you shall gain a dispassion towards what has been heard and what is yet to be heard. This is a bit confusing when you just look at the meaning of the verse literally. So let me take it with some examples. When we were small, we used to play with toys. And as we grew up into adults, we don't play with the toys anymore. Or we don't look at the toys the same way we looked when we were children. Why is that so? Was there any problem with the toys?
No.
So what happened to the same object? The object when you were a child was giving you immense happiness, or it was a go-to for you, like that was the only thing that can give you so much of happiness. But now, okay, take it as a parent now. When you see the same toy, you don't feel the same kind of feeling to derive happiness from that object. Why is that happening to us?
Because we are in different stage of life. As a
Okay.
child, maybe we are as a child, our maturity and also the excitement levels are different.
Okay.
And it's also for the first time you're seeing that toy, so that joy is different.
Okay.
And also you don't think of pros and cons or anything of the toy, whether it is going to, when the minute you become a parent, you start thinking, will this toy be good for him? Is it good for him?
Hmm.
Is it very expensive? Is it less expensive? Too much of thought goes and destroys actually that excitement. Whereas as a child, it's very simple, keeping it very simple, basic, and it's a toy, something for me to enjoy, and that's it.
Yeah. And let me also give you another scenario. So there is a birthday of a child, which is 4 years child. I bring two things. One is a big Dairy Milk chocolate, and another one, a check of 1,000 rupees might be. So I show both of them to the child. So what do you think the child will choose?
Definitely not the rupees, not the money.
Yeah, because the thought process of the child, the enjoyment or the thought that the child has, that the chocolate gives him enjoyment, makes him select a particular thing, right? Because he has that choice, and for his limited knowledge he has, or for the thought process, maturity levels, whatever the child has, the child only knows this chocolate gives me happiness. He doesn't know if he takes his 1,000 rupees, he can buy 50 chocolates or might be 100 chocolates. He doesn't know. So what is the difference that's making is our thought process. As we evolve with our thoughts, we develop dispassion or disinterest to the same things which we used to enjoy earlier. There is nothing wrong with the toy. There is nothing wrong with the surroundings, but it is the change of your thought that has brought a disinterest or dispassion towards that particular object. In the same way, when we are taking the spiritual path, what will happen? It's like a child growing into an adult. A spiritual person taking a small step is a spiritual child. When we see a spiritual child and a spiritual adult, the spiritual adult feels, why is the person still being playing with toys? So when we are running into the material world and deriving happiness from the materialistic objects, because we still consider them as the source of happiness for us, that's why we are running. So it is the same kind of analogy when we take from the child to the adult, the same way when we cross the stages of our spiritual journey. The first stage is where it's like a child, that you, whatever you see, you feel happy. You see that, okay, today this car, this gives me happiness, tomorrow that chocolate, that gives me happiness, that gives me happiness. So that is the first level. So what has to happen to the first level? You slowly perform your buddhi yoga or karma yoga, or develop your intellect slowly, and once your intellect is developed, you will come and understand what is true, what not true, or what is the real source, and trying to see from where the happiness is coming from. And when you evolve in your spiritual path, your the percentage of happiness you derive from the external worlds decreases. That's what we studied. So spirituality is not like a kind of thing that every person will be like that. So if a person is 1% spiritually evolved, that person will derive 99% from the external world. If a person is 2% evolved or 20% evolved, then that person derives 80% of the happiness from the external world. 20% is like toys. Like when you grow 10 years, you leave away certain toys. Even you see them, you don't feel like that they will give you happiness, or you don't have any kind of interest in them. In the same way, when we reach that 100% of spiritual path or hit that mark where we develop the complete dispassion to this materialistic world, that is where we are completely understood the truth, and we have that access to see the divinity within us. And here, what does it mean? Shrotavyasya Shutasya. There is a dispassion towards what has been heard, and what is yet to be heard is from the second, when we are in the second stage. So when we were a child, our understanding is that all the external objects, or this toy gives me happiness, that toy gives me happiness, this gives me happiness. So that is the thing that you have heard when you were in the first stage of spiritual journey. But when you come to the second stage, you don't feel, you understand that these are all the objects not giving me happiness. And finally, you will understand the third stage is that you are the source of happiness. So he is to heard, and what you are going to be heard. Are you clear with this? the 3 stages or the 3 levels of a spiritual path?
Yeah.
So first path is thinking that the material world is the source of happiness. That is what, when we are in the stage 1, we hear and we think. But when you slowly progress towards karma yoga, perform all the actions in karma yoga, and when you get that purity of mind and clarity of thoughts, you will slowly understand that you have to go inwards. And when you start going inwards, that's the stage 2. When you progress deeply into the stage 2 and go to the stage 3, that is where in stage 3 you will realize that I am that bliss, Sachitananda, Aham Brahmasmi, whatever it is, you are that divinity. So in the second stage, there is that difference of what you have heard in the stage 1 and what you are going to hear in the stage 3. So he is saying that. So for that, what has to happen? Your intellect has to go up, go up, go up, go up, clear all the delusions. So when your intellect acquires knowledge and discriminates properly as what is truth, what is not truth, what is real, what is not real, and progresses, finally, it will reach the final destination. At that time, you will understand that in the second stage, there was a great amount of dispassion between what you have heard in the first stage and what you are going to be heard in the third stage. So that is what is the meaning of this shloka. So people don't give away things as like that. But because of your dispassion, why the dispassion has come? Because intellect has been evolved. Intellect has been maturing, or it has been evolving. That's the reason you have developed dispassion. This is not suppressing anything, or this is not total change of any kind of ideas in your mind. It is just because you understand the truths properly as you evolve spiritually. So that's the reason we always say that we should not be emotional. Having emotions is always a virtue. There is no wrong in having emotion, because emotion is our innate tendency, or it is a basic instinct. We cannot get away from emotions. Having emotions is a virtue, but don't be emotional. Whenever your emotions crop up, understand them and choose a right feeling, because emotions are instantaneous and they are short-lived. We always have the ability to choose. You can choose what you want to feel. So Bhagavad Gita is not telling you to get away from emotions. You can be emotions, and you have to be you need to have emotions, but don't become emotional. Don't let the emotions take away the precedence of your intellect, the independence of your intellect. Let your intellect always regain its independence, so that it will direct you always to do the right things in the right way. Let's take the example of lion and a calf. If a lion is not able to get meat in the forest or any place it has gone, if it is not able to get meat, can a lion go and eat grass?
No.
Take the reverse. If a cow has only meat and there is no grass at any place, can a calf go and eat meat? It's also no. So animals, until the animal evolution, all of them are programmed in certain way that they can perform actions only in the way they are programmed. Even though they try, they cannot break their instincts. That's why human life is the only life through which you can liberate, because there is an aspect called intellect. Not only gross intellect, we also have subtle intellect, which takes us towards our inward journey. That's why human life is so much powerful for us to understand, evolve, and also liberate. We have the powerful tool of choice. We can choose what we want to do. We can choose what we want to feel. We are from animals. That's why emotions are there. Instinctive behavior is there. But still, there is always a chance of choice where you can not get the, not go away by your instincts, but still can be rational. So this is what I explained earlier. So stage 1, a typical person in the spiritual journey, the person is involved in its materialistic world. In the stage through Karma Yoga, he gets his mind purified and he tends to turn inwards. And from stage 3, after he turns inward, he starts to meditate and culminates in self-realization. So when he says here that there is a or difference in what has been heard and going about, there is a difference of thought process when we were in stage 1 and the thought that we are going to get in stage 3. Shruti vipratipannate yada stasyati nischala samadhavachala buddhihi tada yogam avapsyasi. So he told that intellect has to surpass all the delusions, all our wrong notions or the false, the things that we have as what we think is true, but which is not true. That is the delusion, the confusions we have towards the materialistic life. So when the intellect surpasses that, you will be able to see that dispassion. That's when you will grow dispassion towards what you have heard before. And now after getting that dispassion, he's again talking about intellect. When your intellect, perplexed by what has been heard, shall stand immovable and steady in meditation, then you will attain yoga, a self-realization. There we told there is a difference between what you have heard and what you are going to be heard. So now he is talking about there is something that you will hear when you are in the third stage. And when the third stage is heard, your intellect will be perplexed because it didn't even think that way. So intellect get perplexed or completely surprised. And what happens when the intellect is totally perplexed and when the mind is totally calm? That is the state when you will be able to connect with your inner divinity. We have seen that mind is a continuous stream of thoughts. We always have thoughts going on, and it will always be there. We cannot control them. And thoughts moves from place to place and wavers when we fixed upon a point. So when we have nothing in our intellect, so we have no goal, no intellect is not fixed to anything, then thought goes from place to place. Here now 1 minute here, 1 minute there. It has no end to where it has to go. Geography is not a border. So it can go anywhere. You will think, you want to meditate, you want to focus. Still when you sit for focusing, is it that 100% we can sit without any thought coming into picture? Even though we think we are focusing, does the complete focus happen?
Most challenging, Abhita. Not at all possible, actually.
Yeah. So it's very challenging. So first stage is this. This is very, very challenging. So what he is telling, he's talking about the intellect getting perplexed. So how does this happen? Let me explain with a small example. So all these thoughts are wandering. So the general way in yoga to control your thoughts is through meditation. When you say meditation comes in 2 phases. In Ashtanga yoga also, we say dharana and dhyana. One is with effort. You need to put a lot of effort. When you say you are doing a dharana, that means you have a single thought and you are trying your best to focus on that particular thought and not attend to rest of the thoughts. Suppose we are doing the dharana on it could be anything. You can take anything to do the dharana. It could be Om. Suppose I think that I am going to do dharana now with Om chanting. So I sit down, I start chanting Om, and how we are taught in yoga is when you have to do this dharana of your Om, you have to chant the Om in a sequence of your thoughts, meaning that now I say Om. Suppose I get to see a thought coming in, or if my mind gets attentive to any thought, then I should chant Om. So as how many ever thoughts I'm getting, it would be chanting Om. So it will be like Om, 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 Om initially, because initially when you sit for that dharana, you will have lots of thoughts, because your mind is not settled. After 5 minutes or 10 minutes, it will be like, it will slow down. The pace will slow down. The gaps between the two ohms reduces, because you're slowly putting an effort so that your focus will be on om chanting, and your thoughts should get subsided slowly. At that time also, it's not that I'll be free from all kind of thoughts. So I'll say om now, and after 5 minutes might be, 10 minutes might be, I'll remember something or the other. And again, I'll say om, then again some. So this dharana has to intensify to get you to a single thought effortlessly. So when you practice something for a long time, it could be cooking also. One recipe, when you are doing for the first time, you will put in lot of efforts to do that recipe. If you had been doing that recipe for 100 times, you even close your eyes and do that effortlessly. The same thing, when dharana progresses to such an extent, you will become single pointed without effort. That is the dhyana. That is the stage of meditation where you will sit. So now you have been able to focus on that single thought. And when you are doing that meditation, and now when you say that you are controlling all these thoughts, or you are not attending to these thoughts, who do you think is helping you not to attend to these thoughts? For whom are you giving the work?
Unable to hear you, Abhita. Your screen is frozen.
Hello?
Yeah, now we can hear.
Okay, now you are able to see?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I was asking is, who is helping your mind not to attend to the thoughts? Here, what are we talking about? What is getting perplexed here? So whenever we give a goal, who will work upon our goal? It's always the intellect that will ensure, like a policeman. If whenever the mind is running away, it is always in the picture also. It's always the intellect that will pull it back when you hook your intellect to a particular goal. So now your goal is dharana or dhyana or a single thought. So you are telling your intellect, I should focus on a single thought. You have told it. So what will intellect do? Whenever your mind is going away to attend a different thought, it will pull it back. It will pull it back. So the moment, every moment you are attending to a different thought, it will pull. So you're saying om, 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 om. Until the time you are chanting om, that means you have a thought. So until that time, it will be pulling it. And slowly, when this effortlessness goes deeper and deeper and deeper, there will be a stage where all your thoughts will get subsided. All your thoughts will get subsided. When all your thoughts get subsided, your mind will think like, how many times this intellect will be pulling me, it's not allowing me, and the mind will get like, okay, fine, I am not allowed to go, or it will get its own mode that it cannot do anything. The monkey is totally tamed now, so it will just give up and then not attend any thoughts. Mind is there, mind doesn't go anywhere, it just doesn't attend because it didn't find its way. Now once the mind is totally calmed down, intellect has nothing to watch now, because whenever the mind was saying om, intellect was watching the mind saying om, and whenever it is going to a different thought, it was pulling and bringing it back. Now there came a stage where your mind is totally calm and your intellect get perplexed because it has nothing else to do, because the mind is totally calm. That was the thing that it was doing. So at this stage, what will happen? Totally mind is calm and intellect has nothing to do and it is totally perplexed. That's when you will be able to access yourself, which means you will be able to access your divinity. This is not something that I experienced and all. So this is the meaning of what is given in this shloka. So when your intellect get perplexed, what has been heard shall stand immovable and steady in meditation. So when you are in that state of mind totally tranquil, not for 1 hour or 2 hours, I don't know how many years it takes or how many lives it takes, but the state they are talking about is the mind totally calm. Totally means totally calm. And intellect not having anything to do because it has also reached a stage to find out the truth, and you will get some kind of experience there where you will hook yourself there in that meditative state. And that's where they say that you attain your self-realization. You will know that you are the divine being. When will that realization happen? These two things: your mind totally calm and your intellect perplexed. When your mind is totally calm, you will be able to realize yourself. Is this clear?
Yes, Sabita.
Or is it confusing? I try to explain it to the extent I know. So in the 3 shlokas, if you see, first he talked that intellect has to surpass the delusion. Then you will develop the dispassion in the stage 2. And here he is talking about the stage 3. When you have reached the stage 3 and you are totally in that stage for a certain period of time or deeply into that stage, that's the time when your intellect gets perplexed. And when your intellect is perplexed and your intellect is perplexed and your mind is totally calm, then you will have always access to yourself. We always have access to ourself is what yoga says. We always, the divinity within us is always accessible. But what is clouding us to access is our mind, intellect, and the ego that is there, that is not allowing us to access our intellect. So when we perform, so from stage 1 to stage 2, how can we progress? When we slowly leave our ego by performing karma yoga. When you perform karma yoga, you will slowly understand that you will give up lot of something as self, because it's a selfless service. There will be no individuality that is attached to your actions, that I am superior, I am inferior, I am the only one doing this. So when you come to the stage 2, your ego has been subsided, and there you are trying to train your mind by sitting in the seat of meditation, by controlling your thoughts or having a single point focused thought. And when that single point focused thought intensifies, that's when the intensification leads to a stage where the intellect also has nothing else to do, and it also gets a kind of shock. And at that stage, when all of them are clear, you will be able to access who you are. So until this 53 verses, it was about how we act with desireless actions, how desireless actions leads to a kind of enlightenment. So that was the verses. And from verses 54 to 72, there is another section which we call as Sthita Prajna description. The person of a person who is an enlightened soul, or it can be also called as a person who is stabilized in the intellect. Such a person is called Sthita Prajna, and the definition or the things of that starts from the verse 54. So till now, our hero was listening to whatever Lord Krishna was telling. Till here, Lord Krishna told. Now he starts. We saw the verse 11 or verse 12 in between. When he starts philosophy, he was still not responding to what treatment Krishna was giving. That's when he talks about Swadharma in the verses of 30 plus, he at least started listening to him. How do we know that he started listening to him? Because now, at least in verse 54, he is asking some questions. Until the time philosophy was taught, there was no questions, there was no reaction in Arjuna. But when practicality was taught, and he is giving all these things that intellect, mind, do it in the Buddhi Yoga, when he taught what is an intelligent action and all, now he is asking one question. Let's see what question Arjuna is asking. Arjuna uvacha sthita prajnasya ka bhasha samadhistasya keshava sthitadih kim prabhasheta kimasita vrajeta kim. He is asking questions here. So Sthita Prajna, as I said, is a person who is stabilized in wisdom or intellect. So Krishna was telling, right, a person who is wise, will renounce all the fruits of action because he knows what is evil. He will transcend the evil to attain liberation. So he had been hearing all these things and he is trying to understand from Krishna. Okay. So such a person, I want to know more about that person. So he's asking, Sita Pragnasya Ka Bhasha. So what is the description of that person who is steady in wisdom, who is so wise and stabilized in his intellect? Who is such a, what is the description of such person? Samadhistasya Keshava. Samadhi state is the state where he is totally absorbed in the self. So when we see the Ashtanga Yoga also, after dharana, we have dhyana, which is meditative state. And when you progress meditative state, you will enter into the super conscious state. That's what they say for the yogis. The samadhi state is the super conscious state. So when you enter super conscious state, he's asking, when that person enters super conscious state, how does he behave? Or what is the description of such a person who has entered the super conscious state? And stitadi kim prabhasheta. Prabhasheta means speak. How does he speak? Kimasita vrajeta kim. And he's asking, how does he sit and how does he walk? So when you take literal meanings of this, we might feel the questions might feel weird. So it's not actually the literal meaning as when we think about how does he speak, how does he sit, how does he walk. He's not asking that, does he speak German, Japanese, Chinese, or he's not asking about the language he speaks. Or when he says, asks about how does he sit, he is not asking about the place he sits or whether he sits down or sits on the sofa. And when he asks, how does he walk, it's not like what kind of slippers he wears to walk or what is his style of walking and all. So there is some kind of in-depth meaning that we need to understand about question of Arjuna. So anyone can sense or guess what Arjuna is trying to ask when he talks about speaking, sitting and walking? Any guesses? Okay, let me explain. Are you able to hear me or still there is a problem?
No, we are able to hear you, Abhita. Here and there it gets cut, but mostly
Okay,
it is
fine.
clear.
Okay. So the questions, totally 4 questions. One is, what is the description of a person who is absorbed in the super conscious state? Samadhi state is the super conscious state of an individual. Anyone can attain that state by doing or by leading the life of yoga. When you merge into the meditative state, and from meditative state, the next state an individual goes is a super conscious state. So that is the state of samadhi, which Krishna has been explaining, that such a person, the person who is wise, when he does all these things in Buddhi Yoga, he will always be able to realize. So once you are self-realized, you are in super conscious state. So such a person, how does he look, or what is the description of such a person? If I have to go out and find such a person, Krishna, how will I find out? Because everyone seems to it is an aspect of mind, right? By seeing you, I don't know whether you are a super conscious person or you are a normal person. So how will I find out whether that person is a super conscious person or not, or whether that person is a Sthita Prajna or not? And how does he speak? How does he sit? How does he walk? So 4 things he is asking. What's his nature? How does he speak? How does he sit? How does he walk? And when he tells about speaking, speaking is one of our sense. We speak with our mouth. So he is asking with regards to all the senses, how does he sensually act in this world? How does the sense organs act in this world? That is the question he is trying to ask when he says, how does he speak? So how does his organs of action act? So when he says, how does he sit? What he is trying to mean is, when we generally say when we are seated, we are sitting at one place and hooked up to a place. So he is trying to ask, how does that person perform an inward journey, or how his inward journey looks like? How does he traverse inside him and be stabilized? And when he says, how does he walk? He is asking that, such a person, the Sthita Prajna, when he contacts this external world, how does he conduct himself? Because you are saying that he has no desires for the action. He is a total selfless person, but still he will be doing certain actions. So when a person with such a super conscious state comes into the world and acts in this materialistic world, how does he act? So these four are the questions that Arjuna has asked. We will see what are the responses, because the verse 55 to another, I think 15, 16 verses are very profound, where Lord Krishna gives the answers for four of this. And the summing up of all these verses is a kind of highly intellectual, and which we can also apply in our day-to-day lives. So the reason that we are coming here is to understand the philosophy did not work for Arjuna. Practicality worked, because the ultimate aim of Krishna was to bring him from emotional state to thinking state. Krishna can tell him anything, or when a person is mentally disturbed, whatever we tell, the person will not be in a state to receive the information you are giving. For a person to be receptive, the person should be in the thinking state. So what step Krishna has taken when Arjuna was not responding is to move from philosophy to practicality. And we saw that when he moved to practicality, at least in a span of 15 to 17 verses, Arjuna asks a question. When a person is asking a question, it could not be a very appropriate question or a question that will benefit Arjuna directly. But still, he is asking a question which makes us clear that he is now coming back to a thinking state. He is giving a thought of what is happening. Are you clear?
Yes, Sabita.
Yes, Kavita.
So from the next verse, we will see, because it's a continuation from verse 55, where Lord Krishna will explain the answers for the four questions he asked. How does a man of stabilized intellect, or a man with self-realized state, whatever you call, the name given in Sanskrit is Sthita Prajna. Prajna is wisdom, Sthita is steady. So a person with a steady wisdom, how does that person behave, or what is the description of a person? How does that person speak? How does that person sit? And how does that person walk? So how does he conduct himself? How does he act with the external world? How does he perform his actions? And what is the nature of such a person? So the answers for the four questions we will see up in the next 14 to 15 verses.